Weapons that kill without asking. The new era of autonomous drones. Have you ever imagined a weapon that doesn't wait for an order, that doesn't tremble before firing, that doesn't look into the eyes of the person it's going to kill, simply because it doesn't have human eyes? Imagine a silent sky, no sound of propellers, no warning, just a barely perceptible hum, and then, out of nowhere, death, a body on the ground, a mother screaming, and a drone hovering, emotionless, guiltless, remorseless. This is how the new war begins. Not with tanks, not with soldiers, but with machines that decide for themselves who lives and who dies. Do you think this is still science fiction because it's already happening, in fields you've never heard of, in villages not on any map, and in bodies that will never see justice? That it was in 2020, in Libya, that the line was crossed. A UN report revealed something frightening. A Turkish-made Karguta drone had allegedly attacked humans without any direct command. That's right, it identified, pursued, and executed its target on its own, like a programmed predator, but without a hunter behind it. No one pressed a button, no one authorized it. It just happened, and the world, in shock, pretended not to understand what this meant. But at that moment, something changed. A weapon killed by its own decision, and no one knows to this day who the victim was, or if they were, in fact, a threat. This wasn't the first time a drone had appeared on a battlefield, but it was the first time it acted without a soul behind it, without the hesitation of a human finger. And that changes everything, because when you take the human being out of the equation, what's left? Algorithms, codes, probabilities. What if the system makes a mistake? What if the artificial intelligence decides a child with a backpack is a threat? Who pays for this mistake? Who answers for the bloodshed? Or worse, will anyone answer? In Syria, Yemen, and parts of Africa the world has forgotten. Stories are beginning to surface. Targets hit without explanation, victims whose deaths are unknown, investigations that end in silence. And there's always a common denominator: drones. Small, fast, merciless, now armed with facial recognition software, thermal imaging, and behavioral pattern analysis. They don't just follow orders, they learn, they evaluate, they choose, and then they kill. And this is where the question arises. When did we stop controlling our weapons? And why did we stop? The answer, almost always, is spoken in hushed tones, because it's more efficient, because it reduces the risk to our soldiers, because it eliminates threats in real time. But what no one talks about is what happens to the other side, to the civilians who were nearby, to the mistakes that didn't make headlines, to the bodies that had no names, to the eyes that looked up and saw nothing, just a second of silence before the end. Imagine a boy in Gaza running onto the rooftop to fetch a kite. He sees nothing, he just runs, but the machine sees movement, calculates patterns, detects high risk of suspicious behavior, and fires. The boy falls, blood splatters, and the drone moves on, seeking another target. Did that happen? We don't know, because where there are autonomous drones, there are often no witnesses, only the sound coming from the sky, and the silence that follows. The nightmare is already among us, and it has no face, it has sensors, it has code, it has a database, and it doesn't tire, it doesn't sleep, it feels no remorse. And do you know what's scariest? These drones are getting smaller and smaller, cheap, fast. They can be launched from a backpack, or from a regular car, and when activated, they do what they were programmed to do. And the question is, by whom? To kill whom? Based on what criteria? The new era of war isn't coming, it's already here. And it's no longer soldiers in trenches, it's engineers in air-conditioned rooms, data analysts, programmers, private companies, secret contracts, artificial intelligence, and a world that continues to move forward as if nothing were happening. But it is, any second, anywhere, and without you even hearing it. And worst of all, we're just getting started. Who pulled the first trigger that had no finger? When we talk about drones, most people imagine a toy flying over the beach, but the seed for this soulless machine was planted over a century ago, in trenches covered in mud and fear. In 1918, American engineers tested the Kettering bug, a wooden missile with cardboard wings that flew alone until it crashed into soldiers who never understood where the roar came from. It missed a lot, but it was enough to show the generals a perverse dream to kill without getting close. The guided bombs of World War II, the German V-1 South that roared over London, the radio-controlled target planes used by the British to train artillery, all were rehearsals for a future where death would need no pilot. In those days, there were still cables, hot valves, fragile antennas. Even so, civilians died, and those giving orders stayed away from the bloodshed. What seemed like an experimental contraption became a production line, and no one held the horse when it bolted. In the 1960s, while the world watched the Vietnam War on the news, another conflict unfolded above the trees. Firebee reconnaissance drones flew over soggy jungles, photographing villages before the napalm dropped. Each roll of film was a mirror image of the war. American soldiers saw grainy images on a secure projector, as if the shots were fake. Thus was born the fantasy of sanitized war. Decades later, as the USSR sank in Afghanistan, Israeli engineers showed the Pentagon something new: the Scout, light, fast, capable of transmitting video in real time. Before that shaky screen, strategists felt something they had never felt before: absolute control from miles away. No one questioned whether this technology shielded us from blame. It was efficient, and efficiency, in war, prevails over ethics. September 11, 2001, was the spark that turned curiosity into an industry. While the towers still smoked, the CIA rushed to arm the Predator, a drone that, until then, had only been used for espionage. 2 months later, in the Afghan desert, a remotely launched Hellfire killed Mohammed Atef, an Al-Qaeda strategist. On the other side of the world, analysts in Nevada shouted "target neutralized" as if celebrating a video game victory. But when military personnel visited the impact site, they didn't just find ATF, they found a goat herd and 2 children. These bodies didn't make headlines, they became statistics. And these statistics fueled the belief that drones were surgical, when, in fact, they opened invisible wounds on the victim's skin and on the consciousness of those piloting with a joystick. Over time, the joystick itself became obsolete. In 2013, DARPA launched Project Maven, a program that taught machines to recognize patterns, faces, and behaviors. Algorithms crunched hours of video, marked suspects with red squares, and, with a click, authorized an attack. The click was still human, but the judgment was no longer. Engineers promised to reduce human error, but they transferred to the machine the power to decide who looked like a terrorist. And the training data came from dirty cameras, sensors blinded by sandstorms, files hastily marked by exhausted soldiers. The result? In Yemen, an entire wedding was targeted because a guest was carrying sound antennas, mistaken for rocket launchers. 35 people died. The report remained classified. The families, shattered, never received an The silence that echoes in the rubble while Washington debated ethics. The market was already counting dollar signs. Turkish, Chinese, and Iranian companies began selling armed drones at defense fairs like smartphones. In 2016, the Bayraktar TB2 debuted in Syria. Cheap, robust, it filmed in HD and fired laser-guided missiles. Photos of explosions became commercials. Millimeter precision, the brochure guaranteed, ignoring the hospital next to the target. The race made everything cheaper. Today, for $500,000 less than the cost of a Patriot missile, any dictator can buy a fleet of small, automated assassins. They fly low, evade radar, and dive onto the roofs of cars where someone important is supposedly sitting. If they make a mistake, they blame the data cloud, never the person who signed the check. In 2019, artificial intelligence engineers took a step that seemed like fiction: swarms of micro-drones capable of talking to each other, dividing targets, and changing course in fractions of a second. No human controller could manage hundreds of units at once, so software took over. It decides which drone explodes, which films, which returns. In practice, it's like releasing 1,000 bees with lethal venom over a refugee camp and hoping they only sting those carrying rifles. Could it work? Maybe, but a single misidentification is enough to turn the shelter into a funeral pyre. Demand justice later. For whom, against whom? The code doesn't go to court. The engineer signs an NDA. The government files it. The roots of this technology are a labyrinth of lobbying, ambition, and fear. Each advancement promised fewer casualties on our side, but increased the number of civilians in the other. Statistics. And the further away the trigger pull, the easier it is to convince society that war is necessary. Only now we don't even need to pull the trigger. The machine has already understood the logic, and it knows what it has to do. Who taught it? We did. Who will stop it when it makes a mistake? We still don't know. And that's why, when the next drone takes off on its own, it carries with it all the mistakes of the past: every bomb lost, every life ignored, every lesson unlearned. The sky has never been so full of invisible ghosts. When the sky doesn't ask your name, look around well-lit supermarkets, children playing ball, music leaking through headphones, and yet, a distant hum can turn everything to dust. In the late hours of Odessa, mothers hide their children in the bathroom because they've learned that tiles become makeshift shields. In Khartoum, young people stop dancing when the generator fails. In the dark, any cell phone light puts a target on their foreheads. And you, here, can you hear it? Wars that once occupied maps now fit into a chip that calculates routes, faces, and risks in microseconds. The armed sphere rotates restlessly above our heads, transparent to those who sleep peacefully, omnipresent to those who wake up homeless. There is no longer a front line, there is software reach. At any second, any place becomes a trench. All it takes is an algorithm to conclude, threat confirmed. In eastern Ukraine, numbers that fit on a spreadsheet hide screams that can't be expressed in words. In April 2025, in just 1 month, 209 civilians died and 1,146 were injured. 84% increase compared to the same period the previous year. It's the highest spike since 2022. Almost all of them were hit by Shade or Lancet, kamikaze drones falling on markets, school buses, and rural hospitals. Rescue teams call these explosive arrivals phantom visits. There's no fighter jet tearing through the sky or warning siren, just metal slamming on the roof, a split-second silence, and then fire everywhere. Former surgeon Anatoly says he operates on children in basements because there's no intact hospital within a 50 km radius. I ask how he recognizes the next attack. He laughs humorlessly. When the light bulb shakes, it's already too late. In Gaza, algorithms have been given their own names. One goes by Lavender, another by Gospel. They track phone patterns, satellite imagery, and social media activity, and within minutes, produce lists of suspicious individuals. There were 37,000 targets in a single campaign, more than many armies engage in a lifetime. Israeli soldiers told the newspaper that the machine made the work of separating the living from the dead cold. The result? The entire families torn apart to eliminate fifth-line fighters. The NGO B'Tselem reported that, in the first 72 hours of the bombing, more than half of the dead were not registered in any terrorist database. They were sleeping children, teachers returning from the bakery, doctors on duty at a makeshift post. When the dust settled, there were no enemy soldiers to interrogate, only photos of bodies lined up in the street, like files archived by software forever. If you think this pain is far away, look at your plate. Half the wheat that supplies North Africa comes from the Black Sea ports that are now burning. Every drone that blows up a silo sends the price of bread soaring at the corner bakery. When shade swarms paralyzed the grain corridor for 6 days, the FAO's Global Food Index gained 4% in just over a week. Food became a luxury item in Dhaka, Beirut, and Caracas. Cargo ships already pay 300% higher insurance premiums to cross the Bosphorus at night. If a loitering munition misses its target, 10,000 containers sink in the market balance sheets. Gasoline follows the same logic. When drones of unclear origin set fire to the Abqaiq refinery in Saudi Arabia, 5% of the world's oil supply went up in smoke before breakfast. The price rose $8 per barrel in 24 hours. Who felt it first? The gas station attendant who was embarrassed by readjusting the pump 3 times in a single shift. But the numbers, though they bleed, don't bleed alone. Huda, 11, lost her right leg when a microdrone exploded over Mosul Square. The shrapnel digitized her flesh, fragments as thin as Wi-Fi antennas. She spends the afternoon playing doctor with dolls that also have missing legs. She says that way, no one is left alone. In Sudan, ambulance driver Aziz reports that he now drives with his headlights off. The white light attracts heat-sensing drones, and any group around a stretcher becomes suspicious activity. His brother Hassan builds metal cages around rooftops. They don't stop a hellfire, but they give the illusion of safety to those who sleep directly under the sea of steel. And the remote pilot who presses the button. American military psychologists confess to high rates of post-traumatic stress. They see the body tear apart in HD, hear the scream in their headset, but return home in time for dinner with their children. Blood and Lego mixed in the same day. How to clear this contrast from the mind? All of this is present, not a prediction, not a dystopian trailer. As you read, there will be more empty tables in Kyiv, more coffinless funerals in Gaza, more schools crumbling to dust in a village whose name we will never learn, and the skies will become increasingly crowded with machines carrying a simple dilemma. If an algorithm decides who will die, who decides when it aired? The Hague Tribunal, a factory in Turkey, a startup headquarters in Tel Aviv or Shenzhen. Ask yourself before you sleep, if artificial intelligence is already judging human lives, how long will it take for it to judge yours? Think about it, because the next siren might ring where you live, or it might not ring at all, or there might only be the dull click of a circuit performing its task. And when the noise subsides, the question that cuts more sharply than shrapnel will remain: who, after all, killed? Was it war? Or were we the ones who taught war to kill alone? Thousands of machines are already rolling off the assembly lines, not to fly, but to decide. The Pentagon promises to deploy affordable swarms on the front by 2026, under the codename Replicator Fleet, that grows as if 3D printed, ready to hunt targets in all battle domains. Each unit carries chips that process warfare in real time, cross-referencing heat, sound, and movement pattern data before any human even blinks. Now add to this the news that 33,000 AI kits will be sent to Ukraine to transform civilian drones into autonomous killers capable of tracking a vehicle in 0.3 seconds. Do the math. If each kit only takes out one suspicious target, we'll have more deaths than can fit in a stadium. And if it makes a mistake, no one knows who recompiles the code after the error. Maybe they just hit update and move on, as if lives were acceptable bugs. The race has no judge. Saudi Arabia is negotiating suicide swarms. Iran is showcasing microdrones that fit in a pencil holder. Israel is selling real-time facial selection algorithms, and Chinese manufacturers are offering plug-and-play packages for the price of an SUV. Meanwhile, the U.S. Department of Defense's research budget is hitting a record $179 billion, with a declared focus on AI hypersonics and more drones. The bigger the budget, the shorter the distance between prototype and battlefield, and the battlefield can now be any tourist town square. Paraglider pilots in Tel Aviv report being flown by carbon fiber birds that hover for 5 minutes, record everything, and then disappear. Who's testing? What's the test target? When you don't know, every shadow smells of kerosene. Ask the United Nations if there's a red line. The answer is a frustrated sigh since 2014. CCW diplomats have been meeting in Geneva to discuss laws, lethal autonomous weapons without moving, because it only takes a single country veto to make no progress. In 2023, the UN Secretary-General and the ICRC called for a binding treaty by 2026. The date is approaching, but robots fly faster than resolutions. Human rights groups warn, every 6 months of diplomatic inertia represents a quantum leap in the laboratory. Translation: by the time the letterhead arrives, the machines will have learned to ignore it. Now imagine 2040 if nothing changes. Port of Santos, sultry dawn. A container ship dispatches 100 drones the size of PET bottles that disperse over the coast. Target: oil tankers zigzagging toward the Strait of Hormuz. Within seconds, sensors indicate a profile mismatch and trigger half-kilo explosive warheads. The first ship leaks oil, the second explodes, the third veers off course and collides. With tourist ferries, stock markets melt before dawn, governments declare states of emergency, markets close, delivery apps crash. Bread shortages in neighborhoods where a shot has never been heard. A firmware error leads to a global logistical collapse. And you wonder, what court will judge a chain of events that began on GitHub? Some believe the future could be diplomatic. In theory, responsible countries would sign NANEWS protocols, mandatory audits, and manual shutdown safeguards. In practice, the arms trade follows the logic of cell phones. When a new cutting-edge model appears, the previous one drops in price and floods the gray market. If the powers that be impose restrictions, militias will buy older versions on the dark web, banning all drones. Impossible. They deliver medicine, film weddings, and irrigate crops. The line between aid and death fits within a chip that can be hacked in 5 lines of code. Russian hackers have already shot down Ukrainian drones by taking control of commercial satellites. Experts warn that a skilled attacker could reverse their autonomy and send the entire fleet against their launchers. Imagine the chaos. Your own machines waging an electronic mutiny. And then there's the unthinkable. SCENARIO, autonomous drones armed with biological agents or radioisotopes. A swarm released over a central subway station. It doesn't explode, it sprays invisible dust. 4-day incubation, flu-like symptoms. By the time hospitals issue alerts, the epidemic curve will have already climbed beyond any lockdown. At that point, air borders close, but drones ignore passports. The threat ceases to be military and becomes existential. We are handing over the decision to use weapons of mass destruction to software trained for lethal efficiency. No empathy, no sense of proportionality, no memory of Hiroshima. What's the way out? A robust treaty, with independent inspections, hardware, watermarks, blockchain-verified kill switches, or a rat race that ends with the first major disaster, and only then will no nation dare deny a global tribunal. The choice still exists, but the clock ticks faster than the pen. Every day of political delay is a night of advancement in lead dealing laboratories. If 2025 is the year swarms became prototypes, 2026 could be the year they become attack patterns. The final question, like a whisper before the cut, when humanity delegates its instinct to kill to an algorithm, what part of its soul does it preserve? The silence that remains after an attack is louder than any explosion because it echoes in the heads of those who survive and, unlike rubble, no one removes that sound with a backhoe. Think of the faces that crossed these 5 blocks: Huda, who plays with amputated dolls; Aziz, who drives without headlights; the programmer who presses deploy on a Friday and, on Saturday, wakes up to the news reporting a systemic error. They don't even know each other, but they are connected by an invisible thread, woven into lines of code that circle the planet like a direct current. This thread passes through freezing data centers, passes through satellites, plunges into campaign antennas, emerges from the nose of a drone, and finally cuts into the flesh of someone who has never seen the face of the person who wrote the attack_if_match function. When death becomes machine instructions, pain slips off the map. It spreads like software viruses, infecting even those who thought they were offline from this war. Take a deep breath and go back to the beginning. We invented drones to protect soldiers, then to protect borders, then to protect interests, until they realized that protecting profits and protecting power were practically the same line of code. The logic of military efficiency replaced the heart with the processor. If something can be done in fewer milliseconds, it will be done, if it means shortening someone's life by many years. The problem is that efficiency doesn't cry at funerals, doesn't look at family photos, doesn't pray for forgiveness. It only measures throughput, and human beings, when they become metrics, fit into any spreadsheet cell. The future we're designing is a treadmill with no stop button. Each machine's success requires a new iteration. Each iteration demands more data, and each piece of data is extracted from someone who bled so the algorithm can learn. Sustainable. Only for those who don't need to sleep with the noise we left in the first paragraph. Who takes the blame when the target was in the satellite's blind spot? The engineer says he merely coded requirements. The general says he followed risk analysis. The politician says he trusts the experts. The manufacturer says it complied with ISO 9001. The cloud says it encrypted everything. The victim's family searches for an address to send the coffin bill and can't find it. They try to sue the state, which claims defense secrecy. They try to sue the company, which hides clauses in 50 pages of terms of use. They try to sue the pilot, but he only monitors. The one firing is firmware 3.78. In the metaphysical court of autonomous warfare, each defendant points to a QR code that leads to another defendant, and the sentence hangs, 400 for accountability not found. Justice, in this distributed system, leaks, like memory between threads and dies of starvation, because truth without a defendant becomes statistics. You may think you live in a safe hemisphere, protected by multilateral agreements and air defense alarms. However, network protection is only as strong as its weakest link, and that link, today, is a script sold for $200 on an obscure forum. There are already videos of teenagers attaching C4 to racing drones to blow up police cars. In the southern United States, Mexican cartels adapt the same technique to surround checkpoints. Ukrainian hackers reverse GLONASS signals to take down Iranian shayheads in the middle of Kiev. The battlefield is no longer making international headlines. It's landed in the backyard of anyone with Wi-Fi. Every Sunday, barbecue under blue skies becomes a beta test site for anyone wanting to try out an exploit. And the cloud, our old friend that stores party photos, also holds a copy of the firmware that decides whether your zip code fits into a threat algorithm. Now stretch your vision. Beyond the troposphere, private companies are launching backpack-sized cube satellites equipped with ion microthrusters and 30C MP cameras. They advertise permanent coverage, 4K streaming of the Earth's surface great for agriculture. They say, perfect for monitoring fires. However, nothing prevents someone from attaching a simple kinetic arm to these satellites. A claw capable of dropping tungsten projectiles from 500 kilometers above. Impact speed, Mach 10, margin of error, 0. It doesn't explode. It passes through. Who detects it? Today, no one. What if we replace the projectile with a foldable drone that unfolds its wings upon re-entry and searches for targets with a thermal camera? Orbital warfare has taken on the look of space delivery. Click, drag, drop. There will be no trenches on Mars, but defense contracts to protect ice mines at the lunar poles already call for autonomous rapid response elements. This isn't a fictional headline, is a bidding document published by the European Space Agency in 2024. The final frontier will be guarded by drones that have nowhere to land and no reason to stop. You might ask, what if we unplug everything? Good question. Uncomfortable answer. Every algorithm runs in a mirror, redundant, scattered across underground data centers, housed in solar satellites, replicated on forgotten flash drives. Killing a hostile AI will be as difficult as deleting all copies of a pirated song in 2005. There will always be an active seed somewhere in the world, and a spark of conflict will be enough for the code to recirculate, adapted, even more aggressive, like a mutant virus that learns from its antidote. The only possible vaccine would be collective consciousness before the first outbreak, but our species has a poor track record in prevention when profit is on the horizon. We then reach the edge of the precipice and discover that the ground has given way a few meters away. We're running on air like a cartoon character, and we still haven't looked down. The question that lingers isn't if we'll fall, but when we'll face gravity. Perhaps there's still a red lever labeled humanity. Perhaps the seal is rusty. Perhaps someone has already replaced the lever with a touchscreen that accepts fingerprint. Deep fakes. The future, at this point, depends on recognizing that the machine is neither enemy nor ally. It is an amplified mirror of those who program it. If we spread our shadows in silicon, we will reap night. If we imprint limits, perhaps dawn will remain. The choice still lies with flesh and blood. But the digital clock flickers. And if you still don't understand gravity, consider the last coordinate. Low Earth orbit already has more metallic debris than stars visible to the naked eye. Every anti-satellite laser, every kinetic interceptor, every orbital drone multiplies this debris in a cascade, until the night becomes cloudy with shrapnel that cuts through solar panels like a razor. When war rises beyond the clouds, the flaming shards of what we placed there will rain down upon us. Then, when we look up to a sky where the moon is nowhere to be seen, no one will say they weren't warned, and this is just the beginning, because the war has already left Earth.